Believe me when I say I am as surprised as the rest of you that I played and grinded the new Overwatch update and think the game is on a trajectory to compete against the competitors Deadlock and Marvel Rivals. Not only is the most recent update compelling, the series of changes that they're undergoing is everything I've ever wanted in Overwatch. And while for some, Overwatch 2 may hit different than the highs that they experienced in Overwatch 1, they certainly are adding a lot of nuance and complexity and strategy back to the game. After grinding this week, I've fallen in love with the perk system, and especially knowing that they're going to be improving it over time with an aim to try to reduce the passive stat bonuses that are quite boring to instead incentivize alternate gameplay styles. Information that we got from Spylo, who got to talk to the developers. I wasn't invited, of course, so I didn't get a chance to ask follow-up questions. Blizzard somehow announced hero bans without inviting the hero ban guy. Maybe it's because I said I like Marvel Rivals. They wouldn't be political, would they? No. Well, at least I can be objective, because while certain additions like map voting and hero bans, which I have been begging for since 2019, have made me bitter even though they're finally coming, I ask your forgiveness, viewers. After so long with battling with them on this subject, it sort of feels like if my toxic, abusive, borderline personality disorder ex rang me up and said, "Hey, I'm starting therapy." Well, good for you. When we met, I looked like this. Now I look like this, and my waifu is Storm. We're having a great time in Marvel Rivals. I don't need you anymore. Ah, yes, but like every great addiction, Overwatch proves, after such a long absence from stepping away from the game, going back to play it again, why it is unique, and its trajectory to be more complicated in a different way to Deadlock and Marvel Rivals will also be unique. Overwatch's plan is to try to have alternatives for every type of player. Competitive 5v5 with perks, 6v6 ranked mode, and maybe they'll even transfer the game to 6v6 down the line. That's still up for debate. Finally, map voting and hero bans at every rank, unlike Marvel Rivals. And a stadium mode with loads of complexity that is sort of like a Deadlock Light. With its own dedicated developer team, that's the mode you go to if you want to amp up the craziness up to 11. While returning to Overwatch after a lapse in Marvel Rivals, there were several things that hit me in the face that I hate so much more than I did before, but also a breath of fresh air, the individual mechanical agency that you're able to evoke on a match, just in the base hero shooter fundamentals, the buttery smooth gameplay performance, though Rivals has performed fine for me with the recent patches, and now the perk system, which I do think is undercooked, but with some tender loving care could be the it factor that does compete up against Marvel Rivals team-up system. Team-ups in superheroes is a common concept, which by itself creates immersion, but also a limiting balance factor, where the benefits of the extra abilities are only given to certain characters, and as well, only happen when those team-ups are in your team comp. I love this system because it rewards flexibility on the hero roster and gives you the opportunity to fix a team-up for your team, benefiting everybody thanks to your individual flexibility, which feels good even for the teammate-focused player who isn't receiving the buffs. Overwatch long ago has wanted to compete as a shooter game to improve its individual agency. Relying on teammates too much in Overwatch 1 is something that they distinctly try to design away from in Overwatch 2. More open maps, more individualistic gameplay, heroes on the whole have been made to be more self-sufficient. And while certainly teamwork is important, for the most part you should always be thinking about yourself. Perks certainly is an extension of that. While a percentage of them will benefit your team, largely they affect your playstyle. A percentage of the time, the perks were irrelevant because the fundamentals of poke being weak to dive if the dive can close the distance before the poke lands shots, or brawl rushdown comps being better on the objective, all of those fundamentals of how the base hero shooter game always works still is the case. And actually, the vast majority of perks enhance the characters as they are, which means, surprisingly, counterpicking is stronger. But it requires you to level up into your perks to enact it. And because you're gaining some power similar to an ultimate as the match progresses, there is a type of currency reset if you choose to counter swap. So counterpicking is overall less effective when you first do it, but more effective when you level up, perhaps. It does depend how each build goes, but in general, I would say that's the theme of Season 15. But I think this is kind of a good place for the game to land, because part of the problem Overwatch has had with its meticulous micro-balancing is that every hero swap would be so effective that you'd want to stay in spawn holding H to be on the optimal pick every second of the game. That is lame. Nobody likes that. And while many cases you do want to swap off getting countered, swapping to a counter is a slower ramp up to that power. Think of it like this. Maybe Hog has the Speedy Hog buff, where when vaping he gets a move speed advantage. Yes, the enemy support might swap to Ana to counter you, but you have this small advantage over her at that point. She hasn't got to her multi-nade yet. You see what I mean? While she'll eventually counter you, once she gets to an equal level with your hero power, she doesn't immediately have all of the power to 100% easily counter you right on hitting the H key. This adds for some interesting texture over time in the game. And as Overwatch 2 has kind of had the problem of everything being so competitively balanced all the time that it's small chip engagements, there's not big team wipes, not big plays. A lot of the things that we loved about Overwatch 1 and people put to the benefit of 6v6, which of course does have even bigger explosions, a sizable percentage of that type of gameplay complexity is brought back into this perk system because there's different power spikes throughout the match. In some cases, I think perks are undercooked and most definitely unbalanced, but as I've said since 2019 when Brig was released, balance doesn't necessarily make the game more fun, it just changes who wins interactions. It changes the hierarchy of who's on top and why. If I were to define the current Season 15 meta with the perks enabled, I would say characters that have cooldown power are almost inherently stronger in every instance I can think of. But all of that is always subject to change. While on paper, it might look scary for Widowmaker to get 50% faster scope shots with her ultimate, or Sojourn to have her ultimate improved as well in a similar way. Overall, I'd say the more mobile or mid-fight based heroes with strong cooldowns are stronger. Torb's level 3 turret is way too good, especially since he gets a full reload on Overload. Moira's damage orb gives a percentage anti-heal, and she fades higher. Ana gets multi-nade. Several of the tank passives are now much better. This certainly has made team comp building more important than I think it's ever been in Overwatch 2, because your mismatches and bad matchups are going to have a bigger, severe gap in them. But I think that's somewhat intentional because something they noticed about why people were missing 6v6 or Overwatch 1 was that it had higher highs and lower lows. Well, Perk's working this way, it sort of happens like that again. But certain heroes might gain an advantage when all of the perks are online, and that's too complicated to talk about in this video. But you might have a disadvantage in the matchup, but then get an extra play that you get to make for whatever reason, with your second perk making you more effective even against the things that would normally counter you in a straight up zero perk neutral. In the same way that you try to work up to your ultimate and you might need that to engage or break that fortified defense from the enemy, you may want a key perk that helps you engage or attack or upgrade some ability as your win condition for the fight. It's more to think about, and it's just a great idea overall. Ways that I think they could improve the perk system is actually taking out some of the natural power creep that's gone into Overwatch 2 to make everything super self-sustainable and put more into the perk system. I would like a perk 0, as in you spawn in immediately and you have a choice between A or B, super minor perk. And maybe even down the line, another perk at the end of the list, as I find these gameplay moments of dynamic expression, especially in the heat of battle, to decide which perk you want to go, A or B, not just to make the play in front of you, but the rest of the gameplay throughout the match. Any moment that I got to use a perk that I thought I'd never get to use gave me a euphoric feeling. Pharah is an overkitted character in Overwatch 2. And I've rode this overpowered rework to get to the top 1% on damage, which I've never done in the history of the game, until they made a hero that perfectly embodies all of my training from playing Quake 3 Arena as a child. Turning your concussive into a mini grav is often not more useful than getting an extra movement or displacement ability, but especially on closer range maps, or if we have control of the map and the enemy's funneling into a choke, doing a mini grav CC into my ultimate is some of the most satisfying gameplay I've ever enacted in Overwatch 2. The minor perk allows you to move while ulting, which is marginally helpful. Depends what you're going against. Certainly having any bit of chase on your ult will help you run down mobile characters, or perhaps even be the difference in you living or dying in your ultimate. But But after practice, I've concluded that I actually think that the shields upgrade is objectively better most of the time. As with the Pharah rework, you want to use your mobility to scoot and shoot and use cover to self-regen anyway, and self-regenning faster with the shield health, even if it's ever so slightly, means higher uptime. But the fact that I could find any reason to choose either or made me very happy. My most played hero in all of Overwatch is Winston, and his minor perk seems a bit obvious, where he either can deal a bit extra damage to deployables, or deal more damage during primal rage when mid-air, which helps you confirm kills, which seems way more fun, and rewards your skill expression with one of the most unique mechanics in all of Overwatch. However, deployables aren't just turrets, they also are enemy shields. So that means if you're in a Winston mirror, you sort of auto-win the face trade against the enemy Winston by his bubble being zapped a bit faster than yours. Seems silly, but a bit of an unfair advantage if you think about it. And while in a couple months, it might get a bit boring if we all figure out, well, actually getting early tempo advantage in the neutral will mean you have more ult later anyway, so even if he, in theory, can deal more damage with his ult, you're probably at a map advantage. Therefore, the optimal meta perk every single time is going to be the first one. By the time we figure all of that out in a couple months' time, they can switch up the perks to whatever they want. Not to mention, there's also a benefit that, well, every single individual player is going to feel about this differently. And it's not so much of a throw that if you build towards your Winston ult and you actually make use of it, that you can't just undo everything I said with your own skill expression. I feel the same with Winston's ult fire, which is a mechanic a lot of the top players scoff at and have never really liked, with the big percentage of his actual value just anchoring in front of your supports, cleaving into the enemy. I like using Winston's ult fire because body-shotting rails just feels good to me. So while healing within my bubble is certainly very powerful, the stats on it aren't so insane that I feel like I can't pick the ult fire if I think it's appropriate for the matchup. Now let's talk about some that I'm kind of concerned about, or that I think the community might eventually feel concerned about. The ones that stand out most easily are the ones that are clearly underpowered. Like Brig being able to deal damage to an enemy she knocks into a wall, kind of similar to a Javelin or Doomfist Punch, is a cool idea, but comparing that to a better Aura Always, which is her base playstyle, right? As opposed to a situational contextual play, there would have to be more buffs on the other for you to really realistically pick that one, considering the rest of the game, everybody else could be picking top tier competitive perks. So if you pick one that's like a half step, you're kind of throwing, especially as this starts to get developed over time. I already don't really consider Brig much of a winner because so many of the ammo characters are better now. The meta's not playing into her hand, in my opinion, but even if it did, character competition starts to get harder because you have to think about what the character will be at level 3. Because that's their max power. So there is a much more severe hierarchy in a tier list now, which I personally like, and it becomes more interesting with bans, but it becomes harder for you to play a mid-tier character, especially much harder into a bad matchup, unless they have some sort of perk to mitigate it, which I don't think that's the case with Brig. We already might have a bit of a debate, even at the highest tiers of play, where Ana players, maybe they do have the aim skill to hit headshots, but the reliability of a self-nano or an extra nano target, essentially. Remember, she's more durable, she can run in, she can deal damage. Often Ana is traded out in the ult fight. Now you have a character that probably stays alive until the next fight. That's way better in my opinion, unless you're so good at aiming that you're going to get lots of more kills with the headshot bonus. You don't really need your support to deal headshot damage, but hey, if you really want to have the fun expression of it, I don't want to steal that from you, but balance and competitiveness of these things do matter. Especially when you consider there's characters like Moira who are just like stupid easy value in comparison to you trying to get headshots in the same role. It's just kind of silly. Support kind of takes an L in the perks patch, in my opinion, because some really easy stuff gets overkitted. Then on the other end of the spectrum is a character like Torbjorn, where I really wanted to try making Torb a healer. The perk said I can hammer my allies to repair... just armor health. Just armor health? Oh my god. Okay, so one or two of my teammates I can sometimes heal instead of shooting and auto-reloading with overload. I mean, like, the gap between these perks is probably the biggest between any two. You have a perk that almost always does nothing. Not to mention, even if you're using it, you're only healing the armor part of the health. So that means like you're not even between fights. You have to do it on your tank in the front line or on your brig in the back line as they're taking damage. Instead of shooting back, it's gigabad to pick or even attempt to use the Tord perk. Now, if we theorycraft how to actually make it better, like, I don't know, could it be always healing? Could it add some over health? Could it add a buff effect? There's lots of ways they could try to make it competitive down the line, but the gap on that Tord perk is insane considering his other perks are really good. Also, I've already talked about this, but people really rate the flanking turret when the stats on the tier 3 turret are absolutely insane. You don't need your turret to flank. Just put it in a spot that's relevant as soon as they start fighting it. Then you upgrade it and it reloads your gun fully. That power swing is pretty unreal. And looking across the roster, basically any perk that has any downside to try to mitigate its power, I'm looking at you, Junkrat, Soldier 76, Batiste. If you lose any effect for a different effect, those become the hardest perks to ever justify because there's so many perks that are just straight buffs. So unless you are 100% certain you're not going to need whatever effect, like Soldier antis himself. There's no way. Bap shoots 20% faster, but loses the instant heal, which is way overpowered. Like, these are gimmicky ideas that aren't competitive as far as I'm concerned. And if we're going to be power creeping the game in general, I prefer that they go crazier and just let it be broken as opposed to having an option that just feels bad to be picking because it's just not good enough. Send balance out the window. We've got hero bans coming. Just make the perks fun. I honestly think Junkrat's perks more so downgrade him. It could just be a skill issue because I can't really aim with the new projectile speed. Perhaps that's my problem, but I don't want to speed up my tire to have it do less damage. Thank you very much. Long range trap throws are cute, but I didn't really need it in comparison to some of the other heroes that get giga buffed with their perks. You've got overkitted characters like Pharah that get giga buffed and tons of optionality, and Junkrat has trade-offs. I'm like, come on. Let Junkrat have a bounce pad with his trap. That's what I think he should get. Even if it's just one bounce, I'd rather have that than these trade-off perks. It's too late to balance it, Blizzard. Like, why add the effect if it's going to have a trade-off? I just don't think that's working in Overwatch. Like, I understand why you would want to do it. Like in the cases that you self-anti, just like you did in StarCraft 2, where the Marines hit the stim pack and injure themselves in order to shoot faster. It's a cool idea, but the upside has to be way above the downside. Otherwise, I'm going to heavily suggest you just pick a perk that's good always, even if it's a little bit less impactful. Characters that double down on the things they already counter seems problematic. However, we of course have hero bans coming around the corner to save from what I'm about to say, but they're not in the game yet. Mei having her slow ray as well as a freeze on her ult fire seems excessive. Orisa gets to shoot longer when she's hitting criticals, which almost entirely will be the enemy tank that she already was oppressive up against. Why oh why do the devs insist on making Orisa better? I kind of don't mind playing against her because I feel I have heroes that function just fine, but there's classic Overwatch competitive heroes that she's really good against, and making her objectively stronger as well as more flexible now with a deployable shield, because we all missed that. I don't know, seems like a bit of a red flag to me. One that I find fun, but I'm afraid the community will hate, is MOBA. Now, something I love about Marvel Rivals is they have stepped gameplay value, which means you have to do a thing to get a thing to then enact a thing. Does that make any sense? Okay, MOBA can upgrade himself to have 2 hearts, capturing an objective faster. Okay, that doesn't mean anything, but get some self-sustain, some self-auto heal while on the objective. Then on top of it, criticals, which he gets from shooting his burning targets, adds up to 100 bonus health when he pops his next lifesteal aura, which already has been rebalanced to be much more burst in nature. So the combination of both of these things means he's a major counterpick threat, or just a massive wall that you can't get past in certain matchups. And his other build is pretty fun too, where he can improve his overrun, where he can ignite enemies immediately after running past them while gaining ammo and reloading ammo while he's running. So either you can go the faster, more long distance build or the objective brawler build. I think both are fun, and I think mostly the community hates this hero, especially against the tanks he is good at. He is way too good at. For the most part, I think Reinhardt and a character like that is left far more in the dust with this new version of the game, they tried to give him some ways to like regen his barrier, or he gains overhealth when he hits a pin. But honestly, the perk system, I think, just enables and triples down on the characters we already know to be very good in Overwatch 2. Junker Queen perhaps being the most oppressive one I've seen, because the proper way to play her is to poke for an advantage, then rush in to clean up. So with that, you can hold your shout until you start to prod for an advantage, then get all of your ammo back, which feels like a dopamine double hit, because you just keep shooting. And once this hero has tempo advantage, your whole team is going to fall over, because Queen is a self-healing melee powerhouse. It's a character like this that I think they need to tone back some of the power inherent in the kit and maybe add more perks. Remember, there's a bunch of things that got added over time where Torb reloads some of his gun on overload, Queen gets a lower cooldown on her axe when she hits multiple targets, Mei reloads her gun when in cryo freeze. All of these things could be better as extra perks, in my opinion, as opposed to instant power that's already in the kit, and then you get perks on top of it that make them even more powerful. It gets a little too crazy for me. I like the perk system, but I think adding more agency to how your character power is distributed will allow you to express it, as opposed to you just simply counterpick the enemy, or kind of a little bit have a MOBA feel to it, where if you level up your character and you're maxed out and the enemy's struggling to figure something out, you kind of dominate. It's not quite the same way that you steamrolled in Overwatch 2. This is something they wanted to address, is to try to get rid of the steamrolls in the game. This actually kind of makes that worse in a way, but again, higher highs, lower lows. Rather than the game feeling so competitive and unnecessarily sweaty, there's just a little bit of that MOBA snowball factor to your hero working and then being rewarded for it working well with more power. I like that in theory. I like it when I'm the one carrying back my team who seems to be feeding off cooldown, and that I, as Zarya, pick the perks that can carry the game, get the graviton surge, bubble these dumb feeders and actually force them to self-heal, manage my resources, pop off from my position, as well as anchor the entire game. That feels great. And while I think supports are still very powerful and important to the team comp, I just think they, at the moment, have less tools to deal with that. Because the carry from the enemy can come in a variety of ways, but it's usually the DPS or the tank. And so because the individual or combo hero power is even amplified now, those comp mismatches are even more severe than before. So the soldier that's uncontested with a Mercy on him easily dominates your team. The enemy Pharah is going haywire? Well, you better have a Diva, because if not, they have all of the options to outplay you forever. I felt this way as Winston if the enemy didn't have the right picks to disable me. I felt this when the enemy Hazard was causing too much value, who, while I don't really rate his perks necessarily as so high, he as a character is so overkitted himself that he can dominate a lot of matchups. The hierarchy of characters is definitely more severe than it's ever been in Overwatch 2, which is something I want. I like that. Just put bans in. But it's also a new version of the game that we might not be so used to, because prior to this, it kind of was supposedly baked into Overwatch 2 that you just can pick whatever you want and it's okay. The game's trying to be so balanced that even if you're on a bad pick, it's not such a big disadvantage that you auto lose, because every character has so many different options and self-sustainability and self-heal, and you're not a huge detriment to your team. No. Now, in the perk meta, you better have the right comp or you're gonna get rolled. The comp mismatches are insane, and I'm kind of happy about it, because that is a huge part of the strategy of the game, and if you're just not respecting certain things and perks and skill execution of the enemy team, you kind of just deserve to get rolled, in my opinion. This kind of thing I think is certainly more severe in Marvel Rivals, and of course with the wrong build in Deadlock or other MOBA games, you'll feel similar. This is just the new way Overwatch 2 is going to play now, with perks baked in, and I'm kind of for it, because it adds to more strategy as opposed to the answer being, well, just hit more shots on the character you're good at and pray. That no longer is the case, guys. You need to always have a way to not get rolled over by their tank, and as well have appropriate marks or disables or anti-damage for their carry DPS. And the reason why this has made me more addicted than before is because the higher highs are worth it in these games. Whatever skill expressive hero that you have in your roster, whether it's landing nades as Ana, having a bigger, better rocket jump as Zarya now, or abusing how OP and overkitted Pharah is like I've been doing, lots of these characters that are in their preferred matchups simply do more. forcing a counter and getting back to square one, well, then you will be at a perk advantage when the enemy try to do that. At least buffering that instant advantage they used to have. You may still opt to swap yourself, but you can do so in a bit more of a comfortable timeline as opposed to it feeling like you have to even lose your ult just to be on the optimal pick every second of the game. A stroke of genius as far as I'm concerned. It's really worked out a lot better than I would have anticipated, considering a lot of the perks looked milquetoast, boring, and just a glorified version of the passive system. Which, by the way, can we just get the role passives out of the game already? Why do they add anything to the game if we can have perks? Like, imagine how much better Reinhardt would be if he got the steadfast perk, similar to how the Thing has knockback resist or immunity in Marvel Rivals. What if that was a thing unique to him and his perk tree, as opposed to all tanks uniformly having it? We've already kind of screwed up the entire concept of the role passives anyway, where Lucio gets extra boop and different characters are getting different effects anyway. Role passives were dumb, individual hero perks are good. So the more the devs do to empower this perk system, I think the more interesting it becomes. Because we don't like counter swapping, but we do like textured matchups, especially when it benefits us. Because losing, if you lose by a bit or lose by a lot, either way you're losing. Right? It's more about how fun is it to win when you do get to win. I think that matters more. Things coming down the pipeline. Map voting, hero bans, which I think in combination will help you make sure that you have interesting matchups even on the maps that you end up playing that you don't like as much, overall increasing your enjoyment of this game by a lot, no matter what your rank is. And we finally might get those top 500 whiners to stop complaining when they can ban Widowmaker or Hazard or whoever they feel they have to. That should, hopefully, allow the devs to engineer the game to be more about the fun of these characters. Let them do crazy things, and if we don't like it, we can ban it. This is what I begged for so long. Finally, I think they might make the game playable. Okay, they finally decided. Maybe fun is better than balance. Yes! Good Lord. And then it's going to get amped up to 11 when Stadium comes out. Can't speak too much on that mode, though I'm optimistic, knowing how much I like perks, that maybe I'll be into that mode as well. Don't know, wasn't able to play it because I don't think I was invited to the thing. Overall, I don't think I've been this optimistic about Overwatch in a long time. You guys have noticed it in my videos, where if I talk about Marvels, I'm in a good mood, but if I talk about Overwatch, I'm super angry. But I think the devs really did take the time to listen to some of the core feedback from the community and not just give them exactly the things they asked for, which often we don't even know what we really want, but instead innovated, gave us some of the performance of the gameplay with an interesting system and new game mode, which is better than the things we were asking for explicitly, as well as, 6v6 and hero bans and a lot of the wish list items that people have been begging for. Oh, and loot boxes are back. I mean, that alone surely saves the game. Screw gameplay, I just want to get free skins. Guys, I know I took Overwatch out of the channel name, but that does not mean Overwatch has left my heart. I'm going to cover Marvel Rivals, I'm going to cover Overwatch. Competition truly does breed innovation, and I couldn't be happier as a hero shooter fan. That release window of Marvel Rivals made things look grim for Overwatch, but they have been in the kitchen cooking. And so have I. If you want to see what I eat or the odd gym selfie, follow me on Instagram. I'm at Frito YouTube. That's been it for me. If you enjoyed the video, please be sure to leave it a like, and don't forget to subscribe and click the bell icon so that you get notified when I upload new content. That's been it for me. I've been Frito. See you guys next time.